How many more children have died on our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something? Time to change, Starmer. Come on, needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? We're going to stand up for our children. Act. Bye-bye. Got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change! Get our children! Go away!
I've just found out my friend's 9-year-old daughter was killed.
You're not wanted!
The person I've held as a child and
Who said it was the Who was it?
While I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now, for two reasons. One, because a ceasefire always freezes any conflict in the state where it currently lies. And as we speak, that would leave Hamas with the infrastructure and the capability to carry out the sort of attack we saw on October the 7th. Attacks that are still ongoing.
Keir Starmer just endured an awkward moment, facing boos and humiliation from an angry crowd. His speech was meant to rally support, but instead it sparked outrage. What did he say that turned cheers into jeers? Let's break it down.
Do you know what the average age of death with COVID is? According to official national statistics, it's 82 years and 3 months. The average age of death normally, 81 years. Do you understand that we because old people are dying? Do you see this graph? The last time we had this much death was 2008. That's the British Medical Journal. No, I came here to speak to this man, not your security. You have failed me.
Thank you.
I've been a Labour voter my entire life. You have failed to be the opposition. You have failed to ask whether lockdown was functioning.
Just behind. Can we just
Do you understand?
Shall we go on in?
Thousands of people have died because you have failed to do your job and ask the real questions. Well, I am telling you now, and
Keir Starmer wants the pride of Labour, but those glory days seem like a distant memory. It's like watching a top player completely lose their touch. He arrived in Southport expecting a warm welcome. He was the Labour leader after all. Instead, he got a reality check he never saw coming. The moment Starmer began speaking, the atmosphere shifted. The energy drained from the room as people fidgeted in their seats, exchanging glances that said, "Is this really happening?"
Who said their grandparents would turn in their graves, but they couldn't trust us with high office. To those who reluctantly chose the Tories because they didn't believe that our promises were credible. To the voters that thought we were unpatriotic or irresponsible. This is a... At this time on a Wednesday, it's normally the Tories that are heckling me. Doesn't bother me then. Won't bother me now. So you see,
the reaction was undeniable. Disbelief, disappointment, and growing frustration spread through the room.
Did they do it because of political correctness, because they were worried about the fact that he was from an ethnic minority, or did they do it to cover up the utter failures of Prevent, of the police, of the courts, of the school of the care workers. I mean, this guy was known to be just drifting around from time to time with violent intent, with knives. And they will have known that. And the whole thing is so inexplicable to all of us.
And Richard Tice, Reform UK's deputy leader, joins me now from Westminster. Richard, did Keir Starmer preside over one of the biggest cover-ups in British history?
Well, Dan, it looks that way. I mean, we don't know really anymore. We know that the Prime Minister's announced a public inquiry. Funny, isn't it, that when the Labour Party's not being challenged, he's quite happy to announce a public inquiry, but not when Labour councillors are involved in covering up a child rape gang scandal. But there we are. Look, I think the position of the Prime Minister is completely outrageous on this, and the British people want answers, frankly. This idea...
This wasn't the first Labour event in Southport. When Jeremy Corbyn led, the crowd hung on his every word. With Starmer, it felt like watching a comedian bomb on stage.
Sky News has, for the first time, uncovered and mapped the networks on Telegram, the encrypted messaging app where the flames were fanned and the riots were organised. We've been working with Pros, an open-source intelligence startup which has a deep penetration of far-right and conspiracist networks on Telegram, to find out who is behind the messaging.
One interesting thing we can see here, especially considering this is the first day, is that the source of most of the information that people are talking about on Telegram isn't British, English language.
Every line was met with awkward silence. Instead of applause, the crowd looked disinterested. The Labour MPs in attendance looked like they wanted to vanish.
I'm sorry to labour this point, but I think it's important. All summer we were repeatedly told that the Southport attack was not terror-related, it wasn't being treated as terror-related. That wasn't true. Because in October, this monster was charged with a terror offence. Now, information was put into the public domain then that didn't collapse the trial. It didn't jeopardise justice. It was just months later. Now, you say you knew about the ricin and the Al-Qaeda bomb manual, and he was known to the authorities. Did you know about that personally? At the same time, the public, the press, and you and the police were saying this is not terror-related, because I think that's the nub of the issue, and that's what's upset people. You say you couldn't speak out publicly, that you couldn't do that, but didn't the public have a right to know, not least the neighbours who had...
One MP practically hid behind his notepad, while another clung to her phone like a lifeline. They didn't need to say a word. Their faces said it all. This was a disaster. So what did Starmer say that upset the crowd? He launched into his economic policies, convinced he was delivering a masterclass.
Prime Minister, what are your thoughts, having come here today to Southport, having met the emergency services involved, about what happened yesterday?
I came here to pay my respects to the victims and families who are going through raw pain and grief that most of us can't imagine. I can't imagine as a dad myself. To get a briefing from the Chief Constable and the emergency services about the ongoing investigation, but also importantly, to have the opportunity to say to those that were responding yesterday from the emergency services, to say a personal thank you to them and to shake their hand, and to say that as Prime Minister, on behalf of the country, we are grateful.
To the crowd, he might as well have been speaking gibberish. The disconnect was obvious. Confusion replaced conviction, and it showed on their faces.
With a roundup of the developments today in the case of the Southport incident that saw 3 little girls stabbed to death at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. The suspect in that case is 18-year-old Axel Rudakubana. Today, police announced that he was facing 2 new charges.
The 2 further offences relate to evidence obtained by Merseyside police during searches of Axel Rudakubana's home address as part of a lengthy and complex investigation which has been ongoing since the 29th of July. The additional charges are the production of a biological toxin, namely ricin, contrary to Section 1 of the Biological Weapons Act 1974, and possession of information, namely a PDF file entitled Military Studies in the Jihad Against the Tyrants, the Al-Qaeda Training Manual, likely to be useful to a person committing or preparing to commit an act of terrorism.
Okay, so
And then it happened. The first big boo. It was like a dam bursting. The timing was perfect, cutting right through Starmer's attempt to explain how his economic plan would save the country.
With it. I think about the families, the friends, the loved ones, those directly impacted, and of course the wider community here. But there's no pretending, I think, that anybody in the country is not untouched by what happened yesterday.
You've talked about tackling knife crime a moral mission for your government. Is anything going to change? Is anything going to happen as a result of what happened yesterday?
I am very worried about high levels of knife crime.
A voice from the back let out a loud, unmistakable boo. As if speaking for the entire room, from that moment, the floodgates opened. Every sentence was met with groans and more boos until people started getting up and leaving.
I think that the burden on working people is too high, and they are also paying huge rises in their costs. But for whether it's working people or others, and I know traditionally Labour leaders might have said, well, it's the tax lever I can't wait to get my hands on. That's not the case as far as I'm concerned, because all of my focus is on growing our economy. Because in the end, if all you do is tax the existing pie or cut the spending of the existing pie, which is ever reducing, you're going round and round in circles. You have to break out of it. I don't accept that things can't be better than they've been in the last 14 years. This is an election that's about change. We intend to change that and to pick our country up, move it forward. We've already had substantial conversations with those people who are already ready and willing to put their sort of shoulder to the wheel with us to say we can do better than this, we can grow our economy, and that will be measured in living.
The mood quickly shifted from uneasy to outright hostile. Disappointment filled the room, but the most striking part was Starmer's face, genuinely stunned, as if it had never occurred to him that the crowd could turn against him. Let's be honest, he did this to himself. It's as if he completely forgot the golden rule of politics: know your audience. In Southport, he completely missed the mark. From start to finish, the event was a train wreck. The kind of moment that makes you wonder how someone can rise so high in politics only to crash so spectacularly. But this runs deeper than one bad speech. Remember when Starmer was fully behind a second referendum? Turns out that was just a phase. In 2016, he pushed the Remain cause like it was his life's mission, demanding a public vote on the final Brexit deal. But then he abruptly changed his tune, telling the crowd Labour needed to move on from Brexit, and they weren't having it. The tension in the room was ready to boil over. He may be trying to win over Brexit voters, but in doing so, he's alienating his own base. Pro-Remain Labour supporters feel betrayed, like Starmer just stabbed them in the back.
The events today are just truly awful, and I know the whole country is deeply shocked at what they've seen and what they've heard. And I know I speak for everybody in the whole country in saying our thoughts and condolences with the victims, their families, their friends and the wider community. And it's almost impossible to imagine the grief that they're going through and the trauma.
People want answers. And during his Southport speech, Starmer was interrupted 5 times while talking about Brexit. That wasn't just pushback, it was a full-blown revolt. And each time, the shock on his face said it all. He genuinely couldn't grasp why his own supporters were turning against him. But it's not just Starmer. Labour as a whole is quietly distancing itself from its pro-Remain past.
I want to pay tribute to Jeremy Corbyn, who's a friend as well as a colleague.
You wouldn't call Jeremy Corbyn a friend?
No. We have to make the case for freedom of movement. We don't want open borders. Freedom of movement has gone and it's not coming back.
Cutting off power, cutting off water.
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. I was not saying that Israel had the right to cut off water, food, fuel or medicine. Wounded by the media, the Sun in this city, are hurt for this city. And I certainly won't be giving any interviews to the Sun during the course of this campaign.
Did you write an article for some newspaper the other day? Surely that's not going to gain you any support across the Northwest.
Would you write for them again, Sir Keir?
I would do, yeah.
Can you guarantee that under your leadership, the 2019 Labour commitments to nationalise water, energy, rail, the Royal Mail
Supporters aren't taking it well. Labour members are tearing into Starmer and party leadership across social media, and this isn't just noise, it could have real electoral consequences. Labour's once reliable pro-Brexit strongholds are slipping away. And why wouldn't they? If you're a die-hard Brexit supporter, why stick with a party that's now telling you to move on from one of the biggest political battles of the decade? But it gets worse. Just when it seemed Starmer couldn't dig himself a deeper hole, he did. This time by praising Donald Trump. Yes, the same Trump Labour has spent years criticising. It's as if Starmer is trying to rewrite Labour's entire foreign policy overnight. But why? What's he really trying to gain from this?
Parties should become more like the MAGA party.
I think there are a lot of parallels that we should draw from the MAGA movement when it comes to UK Conservatives. For too many years, we were, a centrist, vanilla puddle in the Conservative Party. We oversaw record immigration, we oversaw high taxation, and it was on our watch that children were subjected to irreversible gender surgical interventions. That all happened on our watch. We were not Conservatives. The MAGA movement is authentically conservative. It's about faith, it's about flag, and it's about family. And those abiding values are what people are crying out for in the UK as well as in the US.
And what's your advice to Keir Starmer as he engages with the new Trump presidency?
Listen, my advice to Keir Starmer is to stop being an idiot, because, Keir Starmer and half of the cabinet voted against President Trump's state visit last time round. We've got so many of members of the cabinet, David Lammy notably, having carried out vitriolic and ridiculous personal attacks on Donald Trump. They're all now desperately trying to backtrack, and they're all desperately trying to suck up to President Trump. At best, they're going to be irrelevant. But at worst, they have done great harm to the UK's national interest. So they've got to grow up, stop playing petty student politics, and actually stand up for the UK, get a free trade agreement, work on ensuring our military and security agreements are robust.
Starmer takes a call from Trump, and instead of keeping it professional or holding him accountable like past Labour leaders, he praises Trump's role in Gaza. Yes, the same Trump that Labour and Starmer himself once slammed as a disaster for international relations, now Starmer is acting like a peacemaker. Did he really think this would make him look like a diplomatic genius? If anything, it's done the exact opposite. Labour supporters are furious, convinced he's abandoned everything the party stands for. Left-wing MPs aren't just unhappy, they're livid, accusing him of tossing Labour's traditional foreign policy aside. This isn't a minor misstep, it's a complete U-turn from how past Labour leaders handled Trump. Jeremy Corbyn refused to attend a state banquet with Trump. Sadiq Khan openly condemned his Muslim ban. Even Tony Blair, despite his controversies, took a more measured approach. But not Starmer, he's practically welcoming Trump with open arms. This isn't just a bad look, it could seriously damage Labour's relationship with progressive voters. Labour has always positioned itself as the party that stands against figures like Trump, but now the very people who once trusted them feel betrayed.
Interesting was Donald Trump basically saying, yes, he's a liberal, but that's his philosophy. We're very different, but he's a good man, and a lot of regard for him. Did that surprise you? Because your lot seem to spend a lot of time projecting the image that Trump is on the side of Farage.
Well, I think first thing to say is obviously it makes a change from Labour, who basically sent a whole load of people over to root for the Democrats. And then David Lammy and various other people have been extremely rude about Donald Trump in the past. So it's good to see there's a bit of rapprochement. Do we take it seriously, Michelle? Probably not. I would describe it as verbal baby food, which is necessary in global politics. Do I think Donald Trump and Keir Starmer are cut out to get on well? Very definitely not. And I'm sure that they'll be finding lots of things to disagree over in the future, not least the Chagos Islands, probably trade, lots of other issues which...
Starmer, once seen as Labour's saviour, is now facing a full-blown mutiny. And it's not just the left turning on him. Centrists are jumping ship too. MPs are sharpening their knives, and whispers of a leadership challenge are already spreading. Meanwhile, the polls are tanking. Labour's approval rating is in freefall, and even in its traditional strongholds, voters are walking away. This isn't just a policy crisis, it's a leadership crisis. Unless Starmer pulls off a miracle, Labour could be headed for an electoral disaster so brutal that Southport will seem like just the opening act. The real question now, can Labour recover, or will it collapse under the weight of Starmer's missteps?
So I want to be clear at the outset, against the backdrop of these dangerous times, the idea that we must choose between our allies, that somehow we're with either America or Europe, is plain wrong. I reject it utterly. Attlee did not choose between allies.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more political content.